Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is January 6, 2022, and let's talk about Kazakhstan. For a couple of days now, there have been massive, wide-scale mass protests and uprisings going on that started in certain areas of the country and have spread to pretty much the whole country as far as I understand. Details are still kind of sketchy at this point, which has led to many Western socialists speculating on what's going on, whether these are sincere mass protests or whether they're part of some sort of imperialist-backed color revolution. Kazakhstan, of course, is geopolitically located in a very important place. It's on the border of both China and Russia, and a lot of the major Belt and Road Initiative travel routes would go right through it. Obviously, then imperialists would love to get their hands on it. But is that what's going on? Short answer, we don't know yet. But in this video, we will take a look at some of the various pieces of information and statements that have been made. Let's start by looking at some footage of the protests and strikes.
Деньги, забастовка. Маңғыстауды қолдаймыз.
Ben sana şişirge bitireyim, bitir olsana.
Маңғыстауды қолдаймыз!
Тихо! Bu жерде он адам деген болмайды. Оның бәрі жай сөз. 10 адамды сындырады. Бастан өткен нәрсе. Мен соны айтып отырмын мен. Бұл жерде үкімет анау деген сөз болмайды. Келемі айту керек бәрі. Бүкіл осы жерде шешілу керек бүгін. Шешілмей ма? Қыламыз да қанса. Болды бірақ алып сөз. Тоқта, 1 минут тихо. Сосын жаңағы бізді требование жазып отқандар кім? Решать етіп отқан кім? Заңға кім общественный инспектор? Бірден шақтар жақындатып отқан жоқ. Жақындап требование жазсаң, сенікі дұрыс емес, бар ана дейді. Онда болмайды.
Жігіттер, жаңағы 13 адам қайда? Біз жаңа новый требованияны қосып, жаңадан печаттап әкелдік. Асеке, ереке. Тынышталайық, жігіттер, давай жаңа бәрін естідіңдер ғой. Қосатын жаңағы нелерді қостық бәрін жаңадан. Тихо.
Ал жігіттер жаңағы берген требованиялар. Бірінші поддержка новоозенцев. Бар ғой? Мен кәсіподағының төрағасымын, Сатыбалдин Ерболат. Осы требованияларын күні бойы жазып жүрмін. Осымен 4-ші 5-ші рет жаздым. Екінші, контролировать рост цен на продукты, ГСМ и жиженный газ. Дұрыс па? Үшінші, горнякам, отработавшим во вредных условиях труда не менее 20 лет, обеспечить выход на пенсию 50 лет. Четвертый, работникам, отработавшим не менее 15 лет во вредных условиях труда и утратившим профессиональную трудоспособность, установить выплату не менее 50%. Больничная оплата 100%. Признать Жезказган и Сатпаевский регион зоной экологического бедствия. Понижение...
Okay, so there are some clips in order. Those were oil workers striking, then protesters, I think, doing a blockade of a road, if I read that correctly, then a mass rally with various speakers at night, and then apparently a bulldozer being rammed into a bank lobby. I am going based on secondhand information, as unfortunately I cannot translate and I do not know what they're saying. If anyone can help out with that in the comments, that would be much appreciated. There are other clips floating around. If you go on some of the social media sites, I just grabbed a few here for the video. I saw another one of a military truck being stopped and the soldiers being taken out of the truck by the protesters, and then they disarmed the soldiers. So apparently there's some pretty serious stuff going on. I'm assuming that anybody interested in and watching this is not taking S4A as their only source. So I'm assuming you're looking at other sources, and this is not intended to be comprehensive coverage, just sort of a sampler, and then maybe we can add a few insights. So let's start with a timeline of some of the basic events, looking at, this is In Defense of Communism, article from today, January 6, 2022, titled Statement by the Socialist Movement of Kazakhstan on the Situation in the Country. In a statement about the large-scale mobilizations and protests in the country, the Socialist Movement of Kazakhstan calls for international solidarity to the demonstrators and demands the withdrawal of troops from the cities, the resignation of all Nazarbayev officials, the release of all political prisoners and detainees, the legalization of the Communist Party and trade unions, as well as the nationalization of Kazakhstan's entire extractive and large-scale industry. So just commenting there, part of the reason why this is confusing and we don't have so many details, the government turned off the internet. Also, the Communist Party of Kazakhstan is illegal. So I don't think that there has been an official statement from them. This group, the Socialist Movement of Kazakhstan, I think is a Trotskyist group. That's what I read in a couple of places. Anyway, let's get to their statement. So it reads, quote, "In Kazakhstan, there is now a real popular uprising, and from the very beginning, the protests were of a social and class nature, since the doubling of the price of liquefied gas on the exchange was just the last straw in an overflowing cup of patience. After all, the demonstrations began precisely in Janaozen at the initiative of the oil workers, which became a kind of political headquarters of the entire protest movement." Comment, makes sense. The world runs on oil. Continuing. "And the dynamics of this movement is indicative, since it began as a social protest. It then began to expand, and labor collectives used rallies to put forward their own demands for a 100% increase in wages, cancellation of optimization results, improvement of working conditions, and freedom of trade union activity. As a result, on January 3, the entire Mangistau region was engulfed in a general strike, which spread to the neighboring Atirau region. It is noteworthy that already on January 4, Tengiz-Chevroil oil workers went on strike, where the participation of American companies reaches 75%. It was there that in December last year, 40,000 workers were laid off, and a new series of layoffs was planned. They were subsequently supported during the day by the oilmen of Aktobe and West Kazakhstan and Kyzylyurtya regions. Moreover, in the evening of the same day, strikes of miners from the Armalor Metal Temirtau Company began in the Karaganda region, and copper smelters and miners from the Kazakh Mis Corporation, which can already be regarded as a general strike in the entire mining industry of the country. And here they also put forward demands for higher wages, lowering the retirement age, the right to their own trade unions, and strikes. At the same time, indefinite rallies on Tuesday began already in Atirau, Uralsk, Akhtubinsk, Kyzyl-Orda, Taraz, Taldykorgan, Turkestan, Shymkent, Ekibastuz, in the cities of the Almaty region and in Almaty itself, where the overlap of streets appeared on the night of January 4 to 5, in an open clash of demonstrators with the police, as a result of which the city Akamat was temporarily seized. This gave rise to Kasim Jomart Tokayev to declare a state of emergency. It should be noted that these mobilizations in Almaty were attended mainly by unemployed youth and internal migrants living in the suburbs of the metropolis and working in temporary or low-paid jobs. and attempts to calm them down with promises to reduce the gas price to 50 tenge separately for the Mangistau region and Almaty have not satisfied anyone. The decision of Kasim Jomart Tokayev to dismiss the government and then removing Nursultan Nazarbayev from the post of chairman of the Security Council also did not stop the protests, since on January 5, mass protest rallies began in those regional centers of northern and eastern Kazakhstan where they had not previously existed, in Petropavlovsk, Pavlodar, Ust-Kamenogorsk, Semipalatinsk. At the same time, attempts were made to storm the buildings of regional akamats, municipal or provincial governments, in Aktoba, Taldykorgan, Shymkent, and Almaty. Comment, sorry, I'm sure I'm butchering some of these names. In Jana Ozen itself, at their indefinite rally, workers formulated new demands: the resignation of the incumbent president and all Nazarbayev officials, the restoration of the 1993 Constitution, and the associated freedoms to create parties, trade unions, release political prisoners, and end repression. A council of Aksakals was immediately created, which became an informal authority. Comment there, an Aksakal is a Turkic word that means white beard, so metaphorically like a male elder. This was basically the kind of system of village or small region government that was common prior to the Soviet era, and then was revitalized in the 1990s. Continuing. Thus, the demands and slogans that are now used in different cities and regions were broadcast to the entire movement, and the struggle received a political content. Attempts are also being made on the ground to create committees and councils to coordinate the struggle. At the same time, troops were pulled together in Almaty, Aktau, and Jana Ozen, and if everything went peacefully in the Mangistau region, and the soldiers refused to disperse the protesters, then shootings began in the southern capital, and on the night of January 5 to 6, special forces were introduced, which began cleanup of the airport and neighborhoods captured by the rebels. According to various sources, there are already dozens of demonstrators killed. In this situation, there is a danger of violent suppression of all protests and strikes, and here it is necessary to completely paralyze the country with a general strike. Therefore, it is urgent to form a unified action committee on a territorial and production basis in order to provide organized resistance to military and police terror. Comment. Also, Russia has agreed to send in their military to help with the suppression of the protests. Continuing. In this regard, the support of the entire international workers and communist movement, leftist associations, is also necessary in order to organize a large-scale campaign in the world. The socialist movement of Kazakhstan demands an immediate end to hostilities against our people and the withdrawal of troops from the cities, immediate resignation of all Nazarbayev officials, including President Tokayev, release of all political prisoners and detainees, ensuring the right for workers to create their own trade unions, political parties, to hold strikes and meetings, legalization of the activities of the banned Communist Party of Kazakhstan and the Socialist Movement of Kazakhstan. We call on all the workers and working people of the country to implement in practice the demand of the executed oil workers of Jana Ozen to nationalize, under the control of labor collectives, the entire extractive and large-scale industry of the country. So, that's the end of that statement and that article. I want to stress here that the demands being made by the socialist movement of Kazakhstan, these are not yet the active demands of all the protesters. I've seen a couple of photos taken, and I don't know how official they are, so I'm not going to share them in the video, but I've seen some demands going around, like increasing the wages, lowering the retirement age, various things like that. There's also some other strange ones, like denouncing the history of the Soviet Union as like a crime against the people of Kazakhstan, and some other things there. So it seems to be kind of a mixed bag, although most of the demands that seem to be circulating among the demonstrators are of a more progressive character, if economist, in terms of just demanding better conditions, rather than a lot of political type of organizing that may be going on. We're just not aware of it yet, and that isn't what I've been seeing from my very limited vantage point here. But again, I want to emphasize that these are the demands that the socialist movement of Kazakhstan is encouraging the protesters to take up. And that's kind of the issue here. It is in some ways like the U.S. working class. Deep grievances, legitimate grievances, which many people hold in common. But without socialist communist leadership, the movement is fragmented, spontaneous, and unable to enforce its demands where there are coherent demands. And so you get kind of more of a petty bourgeois political character to the thing. This is why people do need to join organizations and bring a Marxist perspective with you. If it's not a Marxist organization explicitly, or if it is, make sure that it is holding to a good Marxist line through your participation in that movement. But we do need organizations. Spontaneous protests will only get you so far. You can go on Twitter any day of the week and find people calling for hashtag general strike. Okay, that's great. We don't even have the trade union organizations to pull that off as a general strike is commonly understood, let alone the kinds of political organizing that we need to give that general strike a real political character that can take it into the achievement of some kind of political power. Along those lines, here's an excerpt from the statement from Politic Sturm, another socialist political outfit. Quote, "However, such mass demonstrations of workers in Kazakhstan are the first ones for a long time. Therefore, the unification of the working masses, even in a spontaneous struggle for their rights, can only be welcomed, given the repressive policies of the current ruling group led by the Nur Otan party. The revitalization of the country's political life paves the way for a serious workers' struggle for their rights and socialism. The growing political activity of the masses inevitably affects the political life of the entire country. If hundreds of thousands of workers, united even by spontaneous demands, were able to shake the bourgeois regime, then with the presence of their own organization, clearly knowing their goals and the path to them, workers will be able to win in the struggle against all groups of the bourgeoisie. An organized political struggle and victory can be achieved only under the leadership of the Communist Party. There is no Communist Party right now, but it's never too late to work for its creation." So, pivoting to another Communist Party, the Communist Party of Greece, they made a statement on the people's mobilizations in Kazakhstan. This is from solidnet.org, dated yesterday, January 5. The KKE salutes the large-scale workers' strikes and people's demonstrations in Kazakhstan against high prices, unemployment, poverty, misery, and other major social problems to which the capitalist system has led millions of people 30 years after the counter-revolutionary overthrow and dissolution of the USSR. We express our solidarity with the thousands of workers who, in defiance of the police state and repression regime, took to the streets demanding the improvement of their standard of living and expressing their opposition to the looting of the country's energy wealth by monopolies. We demand the release of all protesters detained by the police, as well as the release of all political prisoners, the abolition of all anti-union and anti-labor laws, which have outlawed hundreds of trade unions in recent years, in an effort to allow the government to control the labor trade union movement, the legalization of the socialist movement of Kazakhstan and the Communist Party of Kazakhstan, which have been banned by the country's authorities. Signed, International Relations Section of the CC of the KKE. So also the Russian Communist Party made a similar statement. Basically, the consensus, as far as I can tell, is that these seem to be genuine mass protests with actual mass support from all across Kazakhstan, resulting in a general strike of multiple industries. And this is distinct from what we normally see around a color revolution per se, which is a PR campaign and protesters with signs in English, and it's more like crisis actors doing it rather than the entire population with mass support. But, okay, you've got a mass movement with authentic support. What is the political character? Do you have the kind of leadership that can pull it around the right issues, or is this going to get co-opted by the bourgeoisie? I think that that's a lot of what people are concerned about. So here's a tweet. I went looking on the U.S. State Department to see what kind of statements they were making to get a sense of that. And we got a really vague tweet, in my opinion. This is Antony Blinken. Productive call with Kazakhstani Foreign Minister Mukhtar Tiluberdi today. We are committed to supporting Kazakhstan's constitutional institutions and the peaceful and diplomatic resolution of disputes. I mean, that doesn't say a whole lot in my opinion. It also isn't an endorsement of the uprisings. So if that's happening, it's not in that tweet. I haven't seen it. It's entirely possible. Details are sketchy and just emerging. In the meantime, one thing that we can look at, and that I'll probably close the video with here, is an article from the Astana Times, motto Bringing Kazakhstan to the World, dated 19 November 2021, so just a couple of months ago. The headline is World Bank to support Kazakhstan on its path to decarbonization and carbon neutrality, says World Bank VP for Europe and Central Asia. Sounds nice, right? I mean, who doesn't want decarbonization and all that stuff? However, when you look at what the World Bank, being the World Bank, a major institution of imperialism around the world, running debt traps and influencing governments, basically just twisting governments' arms to do what the imperialists want, one of the things is cutting subsidies for state-owned enterprises such as fuel companies. Well, what started the protests here in Kazakhstan? Fuel prices was one of the major things. It's cold in Kazakhstan in the winter, and people need fuel. So why would the government just say, oh yeah, we're going to cut subsidies? Obviously that wouldn't be very popular. It's not a good political move. Well, it's at the behest of the World Bank. When these governments need capital and they get these loans, they come with all kinds of strings attached, and basically the World Bank starts dictating their government policy. On Luna Oi's channel, she is another socialist, she has a good video titled, Is Vietnam Socialist? And basically explains in there, after the Soviet Union was destroyed, when Vietnam had to get funding, they had to go to the IMF, and the IMF started to dictate some of what the Vietnamese government could do. We see this post-2008 as well, where basically if you've gotten money from these imperialist institutions, making the repayments on the loan is the highest priority, and that's where some of the austerity agenda comes from in various countries, because they literally have to, as a term of the loan, prioritize making the loan repayments rather than doing any social programs whatsoever. So let's take a look at this and keep in mind this is one of the things that spurred on these protests. Now, again, I don't see clear signs right now from what I have seen, and this is like a day into it and coming out of a country where the internet is cut. Actually, if you look in the upper left corner, you see that it's dated Tuesday, January 4th. That's because the website hasn't been updated since then. So again, with the limited information we have, I don't see signs of a color revolution so far. It is possible, though, that the World Bank and imperialism generally, knowing that they put the countries under these kinds of strain, eventually pop, and then they have organizations like the National Endowment for Democracy that goes in and funds various projects. We know that they are funding about 20 projects in Kazakhstan, some of the bourgeois political parties that are going to be neoliberal and sell their countries out and play ball with imperialism. We know that they're funding things like that. They have them on the back burner. I'm not trying to go like full conspiracy theory here, like they did this specific thing to get Kazakhstan to pop. It's possible, though, so we can't entirely rule that out. The main thing is whatever the imperialists want to happen, whether this was, directly intended or indirectly intended, whatever, the thing that we want and we need to try to make happen is for the protests and the mass movement to take on a socialist character and fight for working class political power and revolutionary socialism. In other words, wouldn't it be nice if, the imperialists thought that they could spur on an event like this and create this chaos, we were actually able to play it to our advantage. You got to roll with what happens and try to take advantage of every opportunity that you can. That's the point here. Sometimes people who get caught up in sort of the logic of conspiracy and the almighty invisible hand of imperialism can get really down in terms of like, well, they're everywhere, we can't do anything. No. That's not revolutionary thinking. You need to say, we are here today under these conditions. What can we do to advance our interests the next step? Imperialists want what imperialists want, and they take action using the power and resources that they have to try to fulfill those interests. We need to do the same. We can spin imperialist spurred events to our favor. That absolutely can happen. It's a question of how organized we are, how influential we are, etc. So, even if there's something going on here where the imperialists are specifically trying to set up these events to happen, well, we can make it not go their way. That's the idea here. You have to fight. You have to try to do that. That's why it's called class war, because you fight it. All right, let's get into the article now. Dateline Nur Sultan, World Bank Vice President for Europe and Central Asia, Anna Bierda, paid a working visit to Kazakhstan to discuss the investment policy issues to achieve carbon neutrality with the government. According to the Kazakh Prime Minister's office, more than 55 projects worth $8 billion have been implemented in finance, infrastructure, housing, and communal services, energy, small and medium-sized businesses, agribusiness, and the IT sector over the 3 decades of Kazakhstan's cooperation with the World Bank, or subjugation to the World Bank, whatever. The current investment portfolio of the World Bank in Kazakhstan consists of 13 projects worth $3.6 billion. The Astana Times spoke with World Bank Vice President Bierda to learn more about the bank's priorities in Kazakhstan in the medium term and how the bank will support the country on its green agenda. Question: how does the World Bank assess the economic situation in Kazakhstan today, including in the context of the pandemic? Comment: remember, this is from like 6 weeks ago, so it's very recent. What problems remain urgent and cannot be resolved in the coming years? Answer: the COVID-19 pandemic has hit every country hard, and Kazakhstan is no exception. In fact, the pandemic has caused the worst economic contraction in Kazakhstan in 25 years, and it is still impacting the pace of recovery. Earlier this fall, the World Bank updated its economic projections, and the update shows that Kazakhstan's economy recovered faster than we had forecast in the spring. We now predict Kazakhstan's GDP, its gross domestic product, to expand by 3.5% in 2021 and by 3.7% in 2022. Moving forward, what matters are timely policies that can boost growth and ensure a sustainable, green, and inclusive growth trajectory. First, Kazakhstan needs to continue to focus on expanding the COVID vaccination rate. The current rate of 40%, is a good basis for reaching higher levels. We know from other countries that around this rate of vaccination, many countries run into hesitancy among the population, and increases in the vaccination rate become more difficult. The way we see it, widespread vaccination is critical to sustained economic activity and is a necessary step for businesses and schools to remain open. Comment: as anybody who's been listening to this channel knows, we are very pro-vaccine here at Socialism for All. Get it. It's going to reduce your odds of getting the most severe negative health outcomes if you get infected with COVID quite considerably. So you want to protect yourself. Now, the World Bank and capitalists, knowing that, that's a fact, what I just said. It dramatically improves survival rate and lowers your odds of some of the other bad health outcomes, which include many other health complications other than death. They know that. That's a fact. Of course, being capitalists, they just want to use that to try to push people into businesses and schools without shutdown. So, again, this is just another example of having a scientific fact and then different class interests trying to use that differently. I'd like to use it to protect people's lives. Capitalists just want to use it to try to shoehorn people back into jobs, probably before they're really ready to do so, and at times when the economy would more likely benefit from a shutdown, which they really don't want. Continuing. We know from past pandemics that their effects linger for decades. Before COVID-19, Kazakhstan was on a path to substantially improve health and education. Here, I'm referring to the country's human capital. That's how they refer to us, human capital. Before the pandemic, a child born in Kazakhstan could expect to be only 63% as productive as they could be if they enjoyed access to complete education and full health. That means that more than 1/3 of the people's potential was not yet realized. There is no doubt that the pandemic will make the goal of improving education and healthcare even more difficult, and we're worried that children are suffering learning losses and that health outcomes will be impacted by the need for the healthcare system to focus so much on treating COVID-19 patients. Comment, again, they're not actually worried about people's quality of life. They're just worried that this is going to slow down profits. That's it. Continuing. We advise governments to protect education and healthcare budgets and invest more, focus on teachers and their skills. This includes being prepared to teach using technology and pay attention to those students who are likely to fall behind or are already doing so. Another important area for Kazakhstan to focus on is transitioning to a greener economy. In a country like Kazakhstan that relies on fossil fuels, a green transition is complex and challenging. However, the announced 2060 target date for carbon neutrality and increased use of renewable energy are instrumental in this effort, and what is needed now are clear actions, sequence, and time plans for the transition. We urge that people be at the center of these efforts, especially when it comes to phasing out coal. This is what we call a just transition, whereby all of society participates, including government, the private sector, local communities, academia, and civil society, and careful attention is paid to new sources of growth and jobs for people affected. The green transition offers new opportunities, including jobs and services, which will continue to economic recovery. Next question. How effectively do you think the budgetary expenditures of Kazakhstan and the National Fund are being managed today? Currently, the law sets the minimum level of the National Fund at 30% of GDP. In your opinion, should it be reduced or, on the contrary, increased, and why? Answer. According to our assessments, Kazakhstan has done a good job in managing its budget and macroeconomic stability. Public debt is relatively low, and there are ample fiscal and foreign reserve buffers to cushion the negative impact of a potential crisis. However, there is always room to improve the effectiveness of public spending. One area of possible improvement is around equitable growth, which is based on strong human capital and an inclusive society. Another issue is avoiding inefficiencies, for example, by not creating the wrong incentives for inefficient firms and, here comes, state-owned enterprises, SOEs. The bottom line here is that Kazakhstan needs to let unproductive firms exit, or go under, whatever, and pave the way for more productive ones. This will also help a vibrant and stable financial sector to develop, including enhanced access to finance by firms and management of levels of non-performing loans. As for the National Fund's minimum level, I think the focus of the conversation should be on a consensus about how best to use the fund to support Kazakhstan's development. This is important considering the challenges that Kazakhstan is facing from the COVID-19 pandemic, global decarbonization, and the energy transition. Now, the next question gets into really key stuff. Kazakhstan has set the target of reducing the state's share in the economy to as low as 14% by 2026. How effective is the country in pursuing this target? Answer. Reducing the role of the state in the economy is vital for creating a level playing field for private sector investment and innovation. In Kazakhstan, the level of state control over key sectors is higher than the OECD average. This can hamper effective regulation by protecting unproductive state-owned enterprises. The decision to create an independent agency for the development of competition, that's capitalized, agency for the development of competition, they're going to make an agency for that, is an important milestone that can ensure that the government has a, quote, competitive neutral policy that does not favor state-owned enterprises or any particular entities. The government should ensure that it is only active in sectors where it is absolutely needed. This means defining, rationalizing, and optimizing its role to set proper expectations and limits, and exiting sectors where private companies are active and better suited to invest and provide services. By providing an ownership rationale and policy that is uniform to all SOEs, the government can ensure that the SOEs, state-owned enterprises, have effective remits, standards, and governance practices. There are several hurdles to such reforms. Vested interests can make reforms difficult, while high barriers for entry and price distortions make it harder for private firms to enter sectors dominated by state-owned enterprises. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. By facilitating private innovation and investment while removing distortive support programs, including subsidies, the government can facilitate this important transition. So I'm going to pause here. The article does go on, and I'll link it if you would like to keep reading that. So this is some of what is going on behind the scenes in terms of the strings that are being pulled on the Kazakhstan government to cut subsidies, which are, quote, distortive and make it harder for private companies to get in there and exploit resources and people. So this is what the IMF and World Bank try to do. This is why creating large socialist federations which cooperate, share funding and resources in non-exploitative ways, that's important. This is what we're trying to do as socialists. We're trying to end these predatory practices that just go for profit enterprises. We don't want that, but this is the pressure being put on Kazakhstan. Now, I mentioned before the example of Vietnam, and they're a good example of resisting some of the worst of this and, still retaining a socialist-led government that is trying to minimize the harms of having to let in private companies and, this foreign capital and the strings that come with it. What exactly is going to happen here with Kazakhstan remains to be seen. We know, though, that these things can be resisted, and things don't always go the imperialists' way. Our job as socialists is to do everything humanly possible to prevent the imperialist aims from being realized, to organize for proletarian power, and to use every opportunity that comes our way to build class consciousness and make working people aware of what we can actually accomplish when we unite and organize. Without that unity, organization, and some knowledge of theory and history, we are likely to fall into petty bourgeois traps and to not actually organize around the right principles, in the right way, pursue the right actions, etc. The result is that opportunities get wasted, imperialism goes undamaged during its moments of weakness, the exploited working people of the world wind up wasting more years of our lives under the yoke of capitalism. And now, in the 21st century, we also tick closer to climate emergency and the possibility of climate collapse. Not to freak anybody out, but we really do have to get organized. On that note, I'm going to leave it here. What do you think? Leave a comment below. And again, if you can help with the translation, that would be great. From the comments that I did see and translate in the comment sections on those videos, which are also linked to videos of the protests, I saw a lot of people talking about elections or retirement age, things like that. So I'm assuming that that's what they're talking about. Anyway, leave it below. We'll continue in the comments as always. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month. Every donation is encouraging. They are also materially helpful, so thank you all for that. If you'd like to help out without making a donation, like, share, subscribe, leave a comment, even if it's just good video or thanks. All of that helps to boost the channel, particularly sharing on the social media. Back in the real world, join an organization, or at least make some donations to one if you're not ready to join yet. My advice is try to find one that has a decent amount of membership and is actually active. You don't want to get into a tiny group that sort of just discusses books. You can do that stuff online. What we really need now is people doing active work in their communities. So try to find that. If you're drawn to something smaller and just really feel like you want to help build it, by all means, of course, but I'd say go for more active groups, all other things being equal. Otherwise, thanks for whatever your contributions to the socialist cause are. Please keep them up. They're acknowledged and needed. And really, everybody likes good news. We need it. So the more projects that pop up and do some good outreach, some good work, whatever it is you're building in your community, everybody benefits from that. So thanks for doing it. And to everybody who is about to launch a project, thanks in advance. Again, everybody likes a nice positive surprise. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.